I set my coffee down on the kitchen counter and just stood there, listening. My daughter Sandra was in the dining room with her husband Derek, both of them talking about square footage and comparable sales like I wasn't 40 feet away. Like I hadn't buried my wife of 41 years just 6 days before. That night, after they'd driven back to their side of Nashville, I went upstairs to the closet in the bedroom and found the fireproof box Margaret had kept on the top shelf, the one she'd told me about 3 years ago with a quiet smile and the words, "You'll know when to open it." I sat on the edge of our bed for a long time before I finally did. Inside was a folder marked simply, "For Robert. When the time comes," but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up so you understand the full picture, because the details matter. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm 69 years old. I spent 34 years as a structural engineer before retiring 6 years ago. My wife Margaret passed away 11 weeks after her ovarian cancer diagnosis. She was 67. That's how fast it happened. In September, she was gardening. By December, she was gone. We'd been married 41 years, built a life together in the same house in East Nashville, where we raised our 2 daughters. The same house where we'd hosted Thanksgiving every year. The same house where Margaret had kept a vegetable garden in the backyard that she tended like it was sacred ground. We have 2 daughters. Sandra is 43, a real estate agent, married to Derek, who runs a commercial property management company. They live in Brentwood, in a house that's larger than they need and decorated in a way that always made Margaret quietly uncomfortable. Everything staged, nothing personal. Our younger daughter, Lynn, is 40. She's an attorney, family law, which I've always found quietly ironic. Lynn is married to Phil, who works in financial advising. Between the 2 couples, they know quite a lot about money and property. They made sure I understood that. Then there's my nephew Daniel. He's 26, the son of my younger brother Gerald, who died of a heart attack when Daniel was 9. I helped raise him alongside my daughters. Summers at our house, holidays, the years when his mother was struggling to keep things together. Margaret treated him like he was her own. She was more patient with him than anyone, more patient than he probably deserved back when he was a difficult teenager, though he turned into someone I'm proud of. He works as a freelance videographer now, does documentary work, nature films mostly. Quiet kid, thoughtful, calls just to talk. That's the family. Keep those people in mind, because every single one of them matters to what happened next. The day of Margaret's funeral was cold for Tennessee. We held the service at the church she'd attended for 22 years. The parking lot was full. Margaret had been a labor and delivery nurse for 31 years, and half the people in that building had been touched by her in one way or another. I sat in the front pew between Sandra and Lynn. Daniel was behind me, and at one point during the eulogy, he leaned forward and put his hand on my shoulder and kept it there. I still think about that. What I remember most about the reception afterward wasn't the food or the flowers or the kind words people said. It was a conversation I overheard while I was standing in the hallway outside the kitchen getting a glass of water. Sandra and Derek were in the living room, voices low but not low enough. "The house alone is worth at least $750, Derek was saying. "Maybe $800 if you list it in the spring. The neighborhood's gone up significantly. And that's before the retirement accounts," Sandra said. "And whatever life insurance there is." Phil was asking about that. "He needs to start thinking practically," Derek said. "He's almost 70. That house is 4 bedrooms. He can't maintain it alone. Give it a few days," Sandra said. "We don't want to seem insensitive." They gave it 4 days. Sandra showed up on a Thursday with a folder full of brochures, retirement communities, over 55 condos, senior living centers. She spread them across the dining room table like she was presenting a listing to clients, which I suppose in her mind she was. "Dad, we just want to make sure you're set up," she said. "This house is a lot to manage alone." "I've been managing it for 41 years, I said. "With Mom," she said, "it's different now." Lynn arrived 2 days later with Phil. Same conversation, adjusted slightly for a different audience. "Daddy, you have so many memories here," Lynn said. "That can be really hard to live with every day. A new environment might help with the grieving process." Phil leaned against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed, looking around the room like he was calculating something. From a purely financial standpoint, he said, the timing is genuinely good right now. Interest rates are shifting. If you were going to sell, this spring window is probably... I'm not selling, I said. Phil smiled. The kind of smile that means he's just going to wait and try again later. Over the following 2 weeks, things escalated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Derek showed up one Saturday morning saying he'd arranged for a real estate photographer to come by, just to have photos on file. No pressure. I told him to leave. Sandra called 4 times in 1 week to read me statistics about home maintenance costs for single seniors. Lynn forwarded me 3 articles about the psychological benefits of downsizing after loss. Phil sent me a document he'd apparently prepared himself, a kind of financial projection showing me how much more comfortable I'd be if I liquidated the house and invested the equity properly. He'd used a font size I'm pretty sure he thought I'd need. The moment that changed things was a Tuesday. I came home from picking up prescriptions to find Sandra's car in my driveway. I hadn't been told she was coming. I found her upstairs in the hallway outside Margaret's sewing room, holding her phone up, taking photographs of the built-in shelving Margaret had designed herself. "What are you doing?" I said. She startled. "Oh, Dad. Hi. I was just thinking about what this space could look like as a home office. For the listing." "There is no listing." "Not yet," she said. "The way you say not yet, when you mean just give it time. I'm just planning ahead. It helps to have documentation before staging." I asked her to leave. She left, but she took her time doing it, and when she passed me in the hallway, she patted my arm like I was a difficult client she'd need to circle back to. The breaking point came on a Friday. I'd driven to the hardware store and back, and when I pulled into the driveway, I noticed both Sandra's and Lynn's cars parked out front. Derek's truck was there too, and Phil's silver sedan. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the 4 vehicles and understanding exactly what I was walking into. They were all in the living room, Sandra and Derek on the couch, Lynn in the armchair near the window, Phil standing near the bookshelf with his hands in his pockets. The coffee table had papers on it. "We wanted to have a family conversation," Lynn said before I'd even set down my bag. "In my home," I said, without asking. "We have a key," Sandra said. "We've always had a key. For emergencies," I said. "Dad, this is an emergency," Derek said. "You're almost 70 years old, you're grieving, and you're making no plans for your future. At some point, that becomes a safety issue." Phil picked up one of the papers from the coffee table. "We've talked to an estate planning attorney. There are significant tax advantages to beginning the asset transition process now rather than waiting. It protects you and it protects us." "Protects you," I repeated. "The house," Lynn said carefully, "if it goes through probate, could lose a considerable amount to taxes and legal fees. If we handle the transfer proactively, you want me to sign my house over to you." "Not exactly sign it over," Phil said. "More of a structured transition with you retaining lifetime occupancy rights. But the deed would technically..." "Get out," I said. "Dad, I want all 4 of you out of this house, right now." Sandra stood up. "You're not thinking clearly. You've just lost Mom. You're emotional, and you're not looking at this rationally. I'm looking at 4 people who drove to my house, uninvited, to pressure me into signing over my property less than 3 weeks after I buried my wife. That's what I'm looking at, and I want you out." They left. Not quietly, but they left. Lynn was tearful in the way that might have moved me if I believed the tears were about anything other than frustration. Derek muttered something to Sandra as they walked to their cars. Phil said nothing at all, just nodded slightly, the way a man does when he's already thinking about his next approach. After they were gone, I stood in the living room for a long time. Then I went upstairs and got the fireproof box. Margaret's folder contained a letter dated 14 months before she died, a period when her health was still stable and her diagnosis was still in the future. She'd written it anyway. She'd always been like that, organized, thoughtful, 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. 31 years as a nurse will do that to a person. "My darling Robert," the letter began. "If you're reading this, something has happened, and knowing our daughters the way I do, I expect you've had some uncomfortable conversations by now. I want you to take a breath. Everything I've done on purpose. Here's what you need to know. I read it twice. Then I read the documents behind it. I sat on the edge of the bed until it was dark outside. The next morning, I called a woman named Patricia Ellison in Burlington, Vermont. Her number was the first one on the list Margaret had included. "Mr. Hayes," she said, when I gave her my name, "I've been expecting to hear from you. I'm so sorry for your loss. Your wife was a remarkable woman." "She was," I said. "She really was. She established the trust 22 months ago. Everything is in order. Would you like me to walk you through it?" I told her I would. Here is what Margaret had done, put together over the course of nearly 2 years, with the quiet patience and absolute thoroughness that defined everything she did. Margaret's older sister Ruth had owned a 340-acre property in northern Vermont, outside a small town called Johnson, about 40 minutes from Burlington. When Ruth died 8 years ago, she left the land to Margaret. There was a farmhouse on it, a barn, an old sugar house, and a pond fed by a spring that ran year-round. Margaret had always loved it. We'd visited Ruth there most summers for almost 20 years, and when it came to her, she'd held on to it quietly, renting the farmhouse to a local couple who maintained the grounds in exchange for reduced rent. I'd known about the property in the way you know about something you never fully look at. It existed at the edge of my awareness. Sentimental. Remote. Vermont. 18 months before her death, Margaret began preparing. When her sister died, something shifted in how she thought about her own mortality. She told me as much once, obliquely, over dinner. But I hadn't understood the scale of what she'd been doing. She stopped renting the Vermont property and quietly hired a contractor recommended by Patricia Ellison's office. Over 14 months, they renovated the farmhouse completely. New roof, new insulation, updated electrical and plumbing, a kitchen with the kind of workspace Margaret knew I'd love for cooking. She had the south-facing bedroom converted into a reading room with built-in shelves. She had the barn rewired and fitted with proper lighting, a workspace with a large open floor, natural light from new skylights, space for equipment and editing stations. She had a separate heating system put in for it. She'd funded all of this through the careful, quiet liquidation of investments she'd held since before we were married, accounts I'd never tracked closely because they'd always been hers. She'd also, without telling me, taken a reverse mortgage on the Nashville house. The reverse mortgage meant that the house we'd lived in for 41 years, the house Sandra and Derek had been mentally calculating commissions on, the house Lynn and Phil had been discussing estate tax implications for, had significantly less equity than any of them imagined. Most of the value had been converted over the past 2 years to cash, which Margaret had directed to Vermont and to a trust. The trust Patricia Ellison had established was funded with $430,000. It covered property taxes, maintenance, and operating costs on the Vermont property for the next 25 years. Patricia's office managed the accounting. What this meant, practically, was the following. The Nashville house, which Sandra and Derek believed was worth somewhere between $750,000 and $800,000, had a reverse mortgage balance of $320,000 attached to it. After fees and transaction costs, whoever ended up with the property would be looking at real equity of perhaps $60,000 or $70,000, split however many ways they chose to split it. Everything else, everything that mattered, was in Vermont. Margaret's instructions were precise. I was to inform Sandra and Lynn that I'd decided to give them the Nashville house outright, immediately, as an early inheritance. I was to present this as me coming around to their point of view. I was to let them believe they had won. The reverse mortgage documentation would be included in the transfer paperwork. She suggested they would be too pleased with themselves to read carefully until after they'd signed. She also had instructions about Daniel. The barn, Patricia told me, was designed with specific input from Mrs. Hayes. She'd asked me to find out what equipment a professional videographer would need for a documentary editing suite. She sourced most of it herself. It's been installed and ready for about 6 months. I didn't say anything for a moment. "Mr. Hayes? I'm here," I said. She never told me. She said she wanted it to be a surprise for both of you, Patricia said gently. The 2 weeks that followed required more self-discipline than anything I'd done in my professional life. I had to act like a man gradually softening, like grief was wearing down my resistance, like my children were slowly, reasonably winning me over. Sandra called every few days. I let my answers get a little less firm each time. Lynn sent more articles. I didn't argue back. Derek came by once on a Saturday, and I let him walk through the house and say things like the bones are really excellent without telling him to leave. Phil emailed me a revised version of his financial projections, and I replied that I was starting to see his point. Meanwhile, I was packing. Not obviously slowly, methodically. The way you move things out of a house when no one is supposed to notice. Margaret's jewelry, the photo albums, the quilt her mother had made, my father's pocket watch, books I couldn't leave behind. I rented a storage unit across town, and every few days I'd load the back of my car and make a run. Daniel helped me. He was the only person I told, and I told him everything about the pressure from Sandra and Lynn, about Margaret's folder, about Vermont. He sat at the kitchen table and read Margaret's letter, and by the time he finished, he was pressing his thumbnail against his lower lip the way he does when he's trying not to show emotion. She knew, he said. She knew exactly what they'd do. She knew our family, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what about me? Am I supposed to? I mean, what are my instructions? I told him about the barn, about what was in it, about what Margaret had had Patricia arrange. He turned away and looked out the kitchen window for a while. She designed a studio for me, he said. It wasn't a question. She tracked down a list of equipment from someone who knew about documentary production, I said. Apparently she made 3 phone calls before she felt she had the right specifications. He laughed, and it cracked slightly in the middle. That's so her, he said. It really is, I said. The close call came on a Thursday. I'd packed a box of Margaret's nursing textbooks and a set of framed photographs from the upstairs hallway and had them in a bag by the back door when Lynn pulled into the driveway unannounced. I got the bag into the coat closet by the side entrance with about 40 seconds to spare. Lynn came in through the back door, which she'd always done, and stood in the kitchen looking around with that particular expression she gets when she's assessing something. I've been thinking, she said, that we should probably have an estate sale for some of Mom's things before the listing. Get ahead of it. Less for the new owners to deal with. I looked at her. An estate sale for your mother's belongings. It would actually get you better money than just donating everything. Phil did a little research, and apparently mid-century household items are doing really well right now. Mom had some nice pieces. Lynn, I said quietly, your mother passed away 6 weeks ago. I know that, Daddy. Her voice softened on cue. I know. I just think being practical is what Mom would want. After she left, I stood in the kitchen for a while. Then I went to the coat closet and retrieved the bag and put it in my car. I changed the locks that same afternoon. Both doors. I called a locksmith, had it done within 2 hours, and did not tell anyone. Sandra had used her key twice without asking. That was twice too many. The final meeting happened on a Saturday, 5 weeks and 3 days after Margaret's funeral. I called it myself. I asked Sandra and Lynn to come by, told them I'd reached a decision. They were there within a half hour of each other, and both of them brought their husbands. Daniel was already there when they arrived, sitting in the armchair near the window with a cup of coffee, quiet as always. Sandra glanced at him and then looked away. Lynn gave him a tight smile that didn't include her eyes. I sat in the chair that had been mine for 30 years, the old leather one Margaret had reupholstered twice rather than replace because she knew I loved it. I waited until everyone was settled. I've been thinking about what you said, I told them. About the house being too much, about making practical decisions. I think you're right. Sandra's posture changed immediately. Relaxed, satisfied. Derek uncrossed his arms. I've decided to give you the house, I said. Both of you. 50-50, deeded directly to you and your husbands, as you prefer. Immediate transfer. No waiting for probate. No delays. Your early inheritance, just like you wanted. Lynn actually reached over and squeezed Phil's arm. That's Dad. That's really mature of you, Sandra said. I know this wasn't easy to. The transfer documents are here, I said, and put Patricia Ellison's folder on the coffee table. Patricia Ellison, an attorney I've retained in Vermont, has prepared everything. You'll want to read through it before you sign. Phil reached for the folder first, which I'd expected. He was halfway through the second page when his expression changed. His eyes moved back to the top of the document and started again, more slowly. There's a reverse mortgage on this property, he said. Yes, I said. Since when? Your mother arranged it about 2 years ago. The documentation is all in there. Everything is fully legal, fully disclosed at the time of origination. How much? Sandra asked. Phil was already looking. $320,000, he said. His voice had gone flat. With current balance and fees. The room was quiet. You said the house was almost paid off, Lynn said. Her voice had a new quality in it, something compressed and sharp. I never said that, I said. You assumed it. You did a lot of assuming without ever asking to see the mortgage statements. Derek had the folder now. He was flipping through it with the speed of someone who knows how to read a property document. I watched him do the math. After transfer costs and the reverse mortgage, he said slowly, there's maybe $60,000 in equity. 65 if you're lucky. 32.5 each, Phil said quietly. Before taxes. That's not possible. Sandra looked at me. Where did the money go? Mom's accounts, her savings, everything she had. Your mother made her own financial decisions, I said. Her money, her accounts, her choices. All of it is documented. Patricia Ellison has copies of everything if you'd like to review them. She moved money out, Phil said. He was looking at me with the focused expression of a man recalculating, over time, gradually. She was a remarkably organized person, I said. To where? Lynn said. Where did it go? To wherever she wanted it to go, I said. She was your mother, not a bank. She didn't owe you a ledger. Sandra stood up. This is fraud. You can't, Mom couldn't have just... She could, and she did. It was her money, managed in her name, transferred legally through properly established instruments. Patricia's office has the full paper trail. I'd encourage you to have your own attorney review it. They'll tell you the same thing. Dad. Lynn's voice had changed entirely now. The professional reasonableness was gone. Dad, look at me. Where are you going? I stood up. I'm retiring, I said. I've been in this city my whole life. It's time for something different. You're running away, Sandra said. I'm making a practical decision about my assets, I said, which I believe was your advice. Daniel stood up from the armchair. He'd been watching all of it without a word, and now he picked up the 2 bags I'd left near the hallway. Sandra looked at him, then at the bags. You're going with him, she said. It wasn't really a question. He's family, I said. He's been family for 17 years. The only one of you who called me every week after your mother died, just to ask how I was. Not to discuss the house. Not to make projections. Just to ask how I was sleeping, whether I was eating, whether I needed company. I looked at my daughters. You might want to think about what that says. This is unbelievable, Lynn said quietly. Maybe, I said. Or maybe your mother was just smarter than any of us gave her credit for. I told them Patricia Ellison would be in touch about the deed transfer. I told them the new locks had been keyed differently and they should contact Patricia's office if they needed access to retrieve any personal items before the listing. I told them I wished them well and meant it, because I did, even then. Then Daniel and I walked out. He drove, because I'd asked him to. I sat in the passenger seat and looked at the house in the side mirror until we turned the corner and it was gone. How are you doing? He asked, at a red light. Ask me when we get there, I said. The movers met us in Vermont on a Wednesday. The storage unit we'd been loading for 3 weeks held everything that mattered. Margaret's good dishes, the furniture from my study, my father's tools, 41 years of photograph albums, the quilt from the bedroom, boxes of books. The moving crew unloaded it all into the farmhouse while Daniel and I stood in the cold watching, and by evening the main house had enough of our things in it to feel inhabited. The farmhouse was everything Margaret's photographs had promised. Wide plank floors that creaked in the right way. A kitchen with enough counter space to actually cook in, fitted with the equipment Margaret knew I'd want the cast iron. She knew I preferred the Dutch oven I'd mentioned once in passing. The reading room she'd had built off the master bedroom had 3 of her favorite plants in it, delivered and tended by the property caretaker Patricia had arranged. The shelves were filled with books, some mine that had preceded us, others she'd ordered herself, titles I'd mentioned over the years, conversations she'd catalogued without my knowing. She built me a life and left it waiting. I keep coming back to that. Daniel went out to the barn while I was still standing in the kitchen. He came back 20 minutes later and leaned in the doorway with wet eyes and his arms crossed over his chest. She put a full editing bay in there, he said. Professional grade. The monitors alone, I couldn't afford those for another 5 years. She made some calls, I said. Apparently she was very specific. He nodded slowly, not trusting himself to say more. The days that followed were quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Northern Vermont in January is deeply cold and deeply still, and the property absorbed both qualities. I walked the land every morning down to the pond, along the tree line, around the sugar house that I was already thinking about restoring. The cold was real cold, nothing like Tennessee winters, and it required focus in a way that left little room for anything else. I found that useful. I bought myself a good pair of cross-country skis. I started cooking again, properly. The way I'd cooked in my 30s before professional life had compressed every meal into something fast. I found Margaret's recipe cards in one of the boxes and spent a week working through them, one per evening, filling the kitchen with smells that hurt and helped in equal measure. Sandra and Lynn did try to contest things, as I'd expected. Sandra's attorney reached out to Patricia Ellison within 2 weeks. It went exactly as Patricia had predicted it would. Margaret's documentation was exhaustive. Every transaction had a paper trail, every decision had a legal foundation, and the reverse mortgage had been originated by a licensed lender with full disclosure at signing. The attorney Sandra retained apparently reviewed the file, and then recommended she not pursue it further. Phil reached out directly once, a long email full of terms like undue influence and lack of capacity. Patricia replied on my behalf with a response that I imagine was curt in a very Vermont way. They listed the Nashville house in April. It sat for 6 weeks before they got an offer. I heard about this through a mutual friend, not through Sandra or Lynn directly. They cleared $48,000 after everything was settled, split in half between the two families, $24,000 each. I understood from the same source that this created significant tension, particularly between Phil and Lynn, who had apparently begun the spring with fairly specific expectations. Daniel's work was taking off faster than either of us had anticipated. He'd arrived in Vermont with 3 ongoing projects in various states of completion, and the barn gave him space to work in a way his Brooklyn apartment never had. By March, he'd finished a short documentary about a sheep farming family 40 minutes from us that got accepted to 2 festivals. By April, he was in conversations about a longer project, something about traditional logging practices in the Northeast. He was up before me most mornings, out in the barn with the lights on, and I'd see the glow of it from the kitchen window while I made coffee. Margaret had left a second letter. I found it in May, tucked inside the cover of a novel on the reading room shelf, Gilead, which had been one of her favorites. She'd known, apparently, that I'd eventually read it. Robert, it said, if you've found this, you've settled in. I'm glad. I want to say something directly that I couldn't in the first letter, because the first letter was instructions, and this one is just me. I know you. I know you're probably carrying guilt about the girls. I want you to put it down. The guilt belongs to them, not you. For 15 years, they came at Christmas time and called on birthdays and showed up when they needed something, and you kept the door open because that's who you are. But love that only appears when it's convenient isn't love. It's management. You deserve better than to be managed. Daniel chose differently. Every week, every hospital visit, every phone call that had nothing to do with money or obligation, that was a choice. Good choices deserve to be rewarded. I hope you're rewarding him. The pond is beautiful in June. I saw it once in June when I went up to check on the renovations, and I didn't tell you because I wanted it to be yours to discover. The frogs start at dusk. The aspens along the east edge go gold in September. There are moose on the property in October. The caretaker told me they come down from the ridge. I want you to see all of it. You gave me 41 years of a good life. This is the last thing I could give you back. Live in it. All my love, Margaret. I sat in the reading room chair for a long time after that. The afternoon light came through the window at a low angle, the way it does in May in Vermont, and lay across the floorboards in long yellow strips, and I could hear Daniel out in the barn, some piece of audio playing thinly through the wall. I read the letter once more and then folded it carefully and put it in the fireproof box, along with the first one. I talk to her out loud sometimes. I still do, on the walks down to the pond, or in the evenings on the porch. I told her the frogs were indeed extraordinary in June, a sound that came up from the water like something ancient and patient. I told her Daniel had sold a print to a nature magazine and had called me to tell me before he'd told anyone else. I told her the sugar house restoration was going to cost me more than I'd planned, but that the contractor I'd hired was honest and good, and that I'd found myself looking forward to the work. I told her about Sandra's call in August. She called on a Tuesday evening when I was on the porch with a glass of wine watching the light change on the ridge. It had been 7 months since I'd left Nashville. 7 months since she'd sat in my living room, calculating square footage, while I stood outside with my luggage. The call was short. She asked how I was. I told her I was well. She said, "Vermont sounded nice," and I said it was. There was a pause. "Dad," she said, and her voice had something in it I hadn't heard in a long time. Something smaller than her usual voice. "I've been thinking about the way things went after Mom, and I think we handled it badly." "Yes," I said. "You did." She was quiet. "I'm not going to tell you it didn't happen," I said. "You know it happened. You were there." "I know. But I also know your mother loved you," I said. "And I know that whatever you did in the weeks after she died, she would still have wanted me to leave the door open. So, it's open. If you want to have an honest conversation, a real one, call me. I'll answer." She said she appreciated that. She said she'd call again. She hasn't yet, but I believe she will. People sometimes need more time than you want them to. Lynn has not called. Phil sent one email, months ago, that I read and didn't reply to. Derek I haven't heard from at all. Some doors take longer than others. And some never open. I've made my peace with not knowing which is which. Daniel and I spent his 27th birthday at the pond with a fire and steaks and a bottle of wine I'd been saving. He'd just heard that his logging documentary had been picked up for a regional broadcast deal. Modest, but real. We talked about Gerald, his father, my brother, in the particular way you can talk about someone when enough time has passed honestly, with the rough edges included. I told him Gerald would have been proud of him. Daniel said Gerald would have said something funny and deflecting rather than admit it. We were both right. "Do you miss Tennessee?" he asked me. I thought about it. The question deserved a real answer. "I miss knowing where everything is," I said. "I miss the particular light in October. I miss the restaurant we used to go to on Margaret's birthday." I looked out at the water, at the dark line of the tree line against the sky. But this is home now. I can feel it becoming home. It's not the same as Nashville. It's different in a way I think it's what I needed. Daniel nodded. He was quiet for a bit. "She gave you permission," he said, finally. "For what?" "To start over." He looked at the fire. "I think she knew that without specific permission, you'd just stay. In the house, in the grief, in who you'd always been. She gave you a reason to go." I thought about that for a long time. "She always knew what I needed before I did," I said. "Yeah," he said. "She was like that." The elk came down from the ridge in October, just like the caretaker had said they would. A small herd, 7 or 8 of them, moving through the property in the early evening, with a kind of ease that felt like they owned the place, which in every practical sense they did. I watched them from the porch with a cup of coffee and thought about Margaret walking through this same field 8 years ago with her sister Ruth, the two of them in rubber boots and fall coats, the way she'd described it to me once, without realizing she was describing something she'd always wanted to come back to. She came back through me. Through this. I think that's exactly what she intended. I still ride the property every morning, walking the perimeter when the weather allows. I know the land now in the way you can only know something you've moved through slowly, on foot, In all weather, the low, marshy corner near the north fence line, the ridge where the cell service inexplicably improves, the particular quality of the light on the pond at 6 in the morning when the mist is still sitting on the water. I'm writing a book, a technical memoir about 34 years of structural engineering, the projects I worked on, the things that failed, the things that held. Patricia Ellison, who has become a genuine friend over these months, told me I should write it more personally than I'm inclined to, that the technical details are less interesting than I think and the human details more. She is probably right. Margaret would certainly have agreed with her. Daniel came in from the barn last Tuesday evening and sat across from me at the kitchen table while I was reading and said nothing for a while, and then said, "I've been thinking about what Aunt Margaret did, setting all of this up, knowing she was sick, and spending that time making sure everything was ready for you. I think about it every day," I said. "Most people would have spent that time angry," he said. "About being sick, about leaving. She spent it building a landing place for someone else." He shook his head slowly. "I don't know how you do that. You have to love someone more than you love the unfairness of what's happening to you," I said. He thought about that. "She loved you that way," he said. "She did," I said. "She really did. The porch in the evening is mine now, in the way that spaces become yours only after you've spent real time in them, not decorating them, not photographing them, just living in them quietly, season by season, until they carry your particular silence. I sit here most evenings with coffee or wine, depending on the mood, and I look at whatever the sky is doing, and I talk to Margaret when I feel like it. I tell her things are good. I tell her the sugar house is going to be finished before the first snow. I tell her Daniel had the best professional month of his life in September, and that his work is extraordinary, and that she was right about him. She was always right about him. I tell her the pond in June was everything she promised. I tell her thank you every evening, in the particular last light before dark, while the frogs come up from the water and the tree line goes purple and quiet against the sky. She gave me this, every inch of it, every morning of it, every difficult and beautiful thing. She knew I needed it before I knew myself, and she built it for me anyway, quietly and completely, with the same hands that had delivered 10,000 children into the world. The same patience, the same thoroughness, the same love that doesn't announce itself, but simply makes sure everything is ready. That is the whole of it. That is exactly what she did.